have to take responsibility for our actions.
Oh, man.
Instead of blaming somebody else or something
I know.
else.
It makes people responsible for their actions. Recorded live in the land of the forgotten winter, it's the Roll for Joycast, where we quest in order to play our way to a world of holy wholeness.
I am your host, Trin, D&D enthusiast, Jewish D&D enthusiast, and spirituality guru.
And I'm your host, Rory, your Dungeon Master Pastor.
Yeah. Today is our pilot episode, and we are talking about pluralism and interfaith relations in the worlds of Dungeons and Dragons.
But first, let's roll initiative and meet the players at the table. So, Trin, roll your die.
Ooh, I'm using my dice tower.
I've got my giant die. Oh, I got a 16.
Oh, 11.
11. All right, I guess that means I go first. So, I'm Rory. I go by the name Dungeon Master Pastor because for the last 6 years, I've been doing a project that's now called Roll for Joy, where we couple ministry with Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop role-playing games. I'm pastor in the Lutheran Church, and I've been dungeon mastering games for the last 9 years, running multiple campaigns. I've currently got a few campaigns going on, a few in the Dragonlance campaign setting, and some games with kids. I also do retreats. Got into Dungeons and Dragons as a way to connect with my colleagues out in the wilds of Western North Dakota. So that's about me. What about you, Trin?
Well, I'm Trin, and I've always known about D&D, but I didn't get into it until my adult life. And I'm really passionate about storytelling. So I had there was a kind of plan afoot in my friendship group to get me into D&D. So I tried it, and ever since then, I've been addicted.
Oh, and how long ago did you get into it?
See, this is where you're probably going to kick my butt on being in the Dungeons & Dragons world, but I'd probably say going on 2 years.
Yeah?
Yeah, and now, like...
You make me feel like an old man.
No.
But that doesn't mean that I'm any better at this than you. That's the fun of this game.
I know, but I just feel like I'm still a newbie, but I'm also, like, obsessed. So, like, got into playing, like, we did a really friendly, like, first game, and I was trying to figure it all out.
Yeah.
And loved the kind of complexity and all the things going on in it. And then I got really into, like, painting minis, and I just went off the deep end.
That's the way to go.
So, yeah. And I've always been kind of a nerd in a lot of ways, so this was kind of, like, I love playing. So I play every month. I got my normal D&D group, and then I do what I call D&D dating with new people that I meet that play D&D because we just need to know if we're compatible.
That's nice.
In the D&D world. But I'm Trin. I have a little bit of a weird story. So I'm an ex-head pastor, converted to Judaism. I actually dropped out of the seminary school to go study with rabbis and been doing that for a long time, like 8-ish years. So I'm really into spiritual conversations, but I definitely come from an eclectic background, and I love playing D&D. So that's kind of the weirdness that is me.
Yeah. And so hope for this podcast is to have a conversation where we talk about the games that we play and also talk about how our, religious backgrounds come into play in those games or don't, and how the games can then, discover things about ourselves and about the worlds that we create to live in our daily lives.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a connection between gameplay and life, and there's a lot of ways that you can approach the game, play the game, and I love the freedom of that, and I love the art of storytelling and building especially complicated characters and people, because in addition to, being in the spiritual world, I'm in grad school to be a therapist, so I'm very interested in why people are the way that they are and building complicated, complex characters that I feel is more representative of real life.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes it more interesting.
Absolutely.
So I'm really into the dark hero.
The dark hero.
Yeah, like that's more complicated. That isn't just strictly, I'm going to do this for the good of the whole world, because I just don't
Noble Bright, get out of here.
Yeah, no. I want some, like, there's some darkness there. Life has kind of kicked you around a bit, and how has that affected you? So, like, I love a good hero, but also the complexity of, like, there's some darkness there and some choices that might not be altogether knightly.
Yeah.
So I'm not a classic paladin. I'm more of like a dark paladin.
Dark paladin.
If I play a paladin.
Yeah. What do you play?
Right now, I'm playing a paladin.
Oh, a dark paladin?
I am playing a dark paladin because I, like, seriously put thought into it where I was like, I just want to do this, like, I've taken my oath of the deity and I'm going to, like, save the world and I'm this honorable knight. Like, Arthur and the Round Table of Knights, like, get out of here with that. Like, there's got to be some dark sides to those knights. So let's build a realistic character of, like, some shit's been happening to you. Or what's better is that you plan the character, like, the character comes to life in the game. So, like, with a paladin, they take their oath at a certain point. Well, I like to plan that, like, something happens in the game that makes me, or maybe I'm headed toward, like, this typical oath. But then something dark happens, and then I take a darker oath.
Mm-hmm.
And there's different motivations based on life circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. So you like complex characters.
I do.
And you know what? I think we, in the end, all do. We appreciate characters with some complexity, with some real humanity to them, because humanity's complex.
Yeah.
And that's maybe a good segue into our main topic for the day.
Yeah.
Which is, how do we engage in religion in the game? Because the standard way of engaging in religion, in our world building, in our play around Dungeons and Dragons, actually has a couple problems with it, as I see. So as we talk about this, talking about how does interfaith relations play out in the worlds of Dungeons and Dragons? In the Dungeon Master's Guide, it says the gods of your world, and it talks about how the gods are presented in a number of pantheons that you can kind of pick from as a dungeon master. When you enter into a game as a player, one of the things that you're given as sort of material to create your character from is the pantheon of the gods in the world that you're playing, and whether that world is the Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk or Dragonlance or a homebrew world that somebody's created. And as far as the rules of the game is concerned, the deities of that pantheon don't actually matter. It's domains that matter. It's your oath that matters. But the deities are always this, like, key component of what's presented as a necessary part of the world. And if you look at those pantheons, the things that you find are, well, there's certain gods of these kinds of characters. Generally the humanoid characters that your players are going to play. There's the gods that are recognized by the humans and the elves and the gnomes and the dwarves. And then there's the gods that are recognized by the orcs and the goblins and the Kuatoa and the other things. And the core problem of the campaign often ends up being, well, the people of the evil, monstrous gods, because the monstrous gods are always generally described as evil gods, that they have a certain plot that then the people of the good gods have to go out and address, usually through violence.
Yep.
And it sets up a game where we're playing religious warfare. That's exactly what the campaigns that I'm running, the published campaigns from Dungeons and Dragons right now, for the Dragonlance campaign, it's exactly that. There is a war going on, and it's the followers of the evil goddess Techesis who are trying to overtake the world, and along with her plethora of evil god supporters. And then the heroes are the characters that follow the other gods, and they have to wipe out that god because it's the wrong god, because it's evil.
Yeah. I'm in a similar campaign that it's based on the Greek god pantheon, and so all of the characters are taking their allegiance to certain gods, and there are some that are the evil gods, and then there are some that are the good gods. And even though, like, I feel like even we tried to, like, get out of the whole, like, evil good thing, and we're like, we're just gonna be this band of interesting people, and the magic has gone wonky in the world, and the gods are behind it somehow, and we're supposed to find out. But then we ended up still in this, like, fighting the Minotaurs that are serving this dark god of war and are just pillaging villages around, and we're basically fighting them and preparing different cultures and different towns and people. We have the centaurs and then, like, this town that's, like, in the middle of it all, getting people ready to fight the Minotaurs and kill them all.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like even if you don't mean to fall into that trope, the way the worlds are built, you end up going in there anyway.
Yeah.
And it is this, like, religious warfare because, like, these people serve these gods, but we battled the lizard people who serve this other god, and we're battling the Minotaurs that serve this other god. So it's, even though we didn't want to kind of go down that route, but we did anyway.
Mm-hmm. So you didn't want to play a game where it was a game of religious warfare.
No.
But it ended up that as you played, this was what was at the base of it.
Right.
And I feel like that often happens in the games that we play in Dungeons & Dragons, because the characters go from, low levels to then increasingly high levels where they have the capacity and the power to interact with gods. And the stories go to that place. They go to this place of, well, what's the religious reality here that's really at play in the world as it is?
Yeah. I just feel like we're not really, like, because it's in our real life so much, we kind of play it out subconsciously, even if we don't mean to.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm interested in more, like, the relationship of, like, why do we bring that to the game, even when we don't mean to bring it to the game?
Mm-hmm.
And then how is that tied into regular life, too?
Yeah. So with the worlds, as they're generally presented in a D&D world that you play in, whether it's one of the published worlds of Forgotten Realms, Greyhawk, Dragonlance, Eberron, these other places, or it's, a lot of the homebrew campaigns that people play. One of the problems of presenting the world in this way is that, yes, it sets us up to have the main conflict or, major conflicts be these conflicts of religious warfare, where the enemies are ultimately worshiping the wrong gods and that they're worth killing and taking all their stuff because they're worshiping the wrong gods.
Yeah.
So that's problem one. The other problem is that it's not actually, a great opportunity to practice something that we could all use more practice in. And that's, how do we interact with people of other religious traditions?
Mm.
See, in the standard D&D pantheon, there's this god over here that's the god of light, and there's that god over here that's the god of nature, and there's this god over here that's the god of life, and there's that god over there that's the god of creativity, and this god that's the god of envy, and that god that's the god of disease. And each god sort of represents and has a very limited portfolio. Like, there's no tension around between the deities. Like, there can be this equilibrium where I worship this and you deal with that, where, the followers of those traditions, they can interact, and they're not really having the opportunity to have to engage and see sameness across difference. They can just see difference. Do you hear what I'm saying?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I'm just thinking about the campaign I'm in right now, and it's all of them serve different gods, but then it also, like, even within our tight knit group, we all serve different. There's just me and my friend who's a Minotaur, but left the bad Minotaurs, right, that serve the god of war, to come and be with us. But they serve the same god that I do, and so we have this, like, kinship because of that, I guess. And we're both a little dark, but the rest of the group serves these different gods. But it really shows that when we're trying to work toward a common goal, though, eventually what ends up happening is that they have to take into account the god that they serve and their motivation.
Yeah, what's their motivation for
Right.
being a part of this campaign?
So, like, in my campaign, some of my friends they serve the god Nylea, which is nature and animals.
Mm-hmm.
And so in everything that we do, what has to be taken into consideration is her allegiance to nature and animals and that god.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that pits them against the rest of us who are friends and have created these backstories of having relationship together. We're not strangers.
Mm-hmm.
So it creates, like, this natural, like, we find ourselves having problems because of these gods we serve and different cultural differences, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so our group is having to navigate that. And I'm always the one that's like, but we stick together. But then because of our allegiances to other gods, there's always this clash of culture.
Yeah.
And so, like, in our group, we're really having fun, I think. What is it like to keep this group together and see what binds us together rather than what differentiates us?
Mm-hmm.
But then we have, like, these times where, like, somebody will have to do this weird thing because this God demands it, which then affects their allegiances to other people and other cultures negatively. But it's always, like, divine.
Mm-hmm.
From the divine, right?
Yeah,
Like,
well, that's an often like used GM tool is you have somebody's God speak to them and tell them to go do the thing that pushes the adventure along.
Right.
It's a classic tool.
Right. And then we have to do, but it also like creates conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just interesting. We're trying to do that, but then we're still engaging in religious warfare overall.
Yeah, I mean, there's religious conflict.
Right.
And it's not necessarily that the conflict that's problematic. It's the generalization of an entire group of people based on the God that they serve. That's the real problem that I want to kind of suss out. There's an African theologian, Ogunike, who talks about there's been a history throughout much of the Western religious expressions of calling some people who worship differently than yourself, calling them savages, calling them heathens, and ultimately dehumanizing them because they don't worship the right God. They don't worship the God that I worship. And through that dehumanization, then set up a reality that can turn them into monsters who the theologian non-monsters can then go kill and take their stuff. That's the American West and our relationships in the past with Native American people, that they didn't worship the Christian God. So that was grounds to dehumanize them, call them savages, and say, well, they really have no right to any of this.
Mm-hmm. I think throughout history they've done that to many people groups. So like one thing I learned, because my friend led an organization that centered Black voices, and she's amazing. Was amazing. She passed away, but we were talking about the history of the Western world and this whole like savage relationship. And I'm multiracial, and my grandmother's an immigrant from World War II. She's a war bride from the Philippines. And so my friend looked me dead in the face and was like, your people were savages here before they were anything else. And I was like, what? And she pulled out this like article of the origins of the circus, and they would display Filipino people as savages and other groups of people in their like freak show. And Native Americans were a part of that as well. And this was like, back in history, and it was like the origins of the circus. And I did not know that specifically pertained to Filipino people, because they are a tribal people, and they were put on display as and like there was signs, and they were treated like animals because they did not worship the same gods. They were not refined. And so like I had no words in that with my friend, but she was trying to make a point on like what we do when we classify people as other. Well, you don't worship the same God as me, you're not as refined as me, or like the dehumanization that has taken place, not just with Black lives, yes, but with a lot of different minority lives. And she was making a point that you were considered that as well. Yeah. And I was like, oh, yeah, I have to unpack how I feel about that. Yeah. And like that continued for a while. And that even in the 40s, when my grandmother was arranged to marry here and shipped here to marry an American soldier, that she did not know, and she didn't have a say, and was still kind of treated as if, well, you're less than. Yeah, treated as less than. Right. So it's very interesting learning that fact about my own history I did not know, and then seeing my own family story and how, like, she didn't have a say. Like,
Yeah.
it was marry this stranger in a foreign land and get shipped over there, and you don't even speak the same language, or there's nothing left for you here after the war.
Yeah.
It's just interesting about what we do to when we generalize any group of people. It is really dangerous, and a lot of times in history has led to heinous acts against people that should never happen, and genocide.
Mm-hmm. So how do we get away in our play and storytelling from doing this, from setting up worlds where dehumanization is baked into the plot, and where these generalizations are just we fall into whether we really set out to play that game or not?
Right.
That's the real question. And so let's do some game design theopoetics and try to figure out a way out of that situation. How would we design a game to play, design a D&D world or campaign that doesn't require that fall into generalizations and dehumanization? So when I say theopoetics, it's kind of talking about, like, how do we discuss these things? How do we incorporate some of these convictions about the recognition of our shared humanity in the practices, specifically in the game design? And it seems to me that one of the key ingredients in all this is that a key ingredient in engaging across religious differences in a productive and ethical way is the presence of humility. That humility, being able to say, like, ultimately, I don't know all there is to know. That humility is that space to say, well, my way isn't necessarily the only way of understanding it. That some questions will never be answered. There's a quote from the Quran that was shared by scholars who wrote a theological letter called the Common Word Open Letter. It was toward a sort of shared understanding across religious difference between Christians and Muslims, initiated by Islamic scholars. And in it, they quote this line from the Quran where it says, "For each we have appointed a law and a way. Had God willed, he could have made you one community. But that he may try you by that which he hath given you, he hath made you as ye are. So vie one with another in good works. Unto God ye will all return, and he will then inform you of that wherein ye differ." So in this quote, there is this space, even there in the Quran, this gap of unknowing, that wherein ye differ.
Yeah.
That is room to have some open-ended space to encounter people across religious difference that the Islamic scholars are drawing from as they reach out to Christian leaders.
I think, too, we create difference where we don't recognize that there's commonality. Often we just create more difference than maybe there is. And so I see this in the Abrahamic religions. I mean, as a Jewish person, Muslim people, we have, like, a core root that is related, even, like, blood-wise. So, like, but we focus on the difference. But really, there's a root that we come from the same family. And so these Abrahamic religions, and I would include Christianity there as well, we focus so much on difference, but then we sometimes miss that there is commonality there that we share in the difference. And I feel like there's a reason for that. I would agree with that quote, that if God wanted one people, God would have made one people, but God didn't.
Right.
And so what is that teaching? So, like, for those of us who are active in the spiritual world and in faith and in life, that in itself, God is teaching us all, regardless of religion, culture, where we come from. There is this need to work out how to be together and appreciate the difference of perspective, practice, and culture, and that there's richness in that. And we've been kind of conditioned the opposite. Yeah,
we often have been. When I think there is a real holiness to having a conversation across difference, seeking for that common ground. and that setting up our games to more give that opportunity to have some conversation across difference, like you and your party, finding those commonalities, finding what that common bond is, that's actually holy work, and that's not a downside. That's actually a really great part of the game. But it's how do we get away from the generalizations where there is no opportunity for that conversation? Because, well, I know with certainty that creature is evil because they worship this evil god.
Right.
And I think we get there by changing how we design our worlds, how we set up the religious truths that the players then engage with, and really move from looking at the religion in the games from a top-down perspective to a more post-colonialist bottom-up perspective, where we present not the pantheon of deities necessarily that says, okay, here's the gods. There's Paladine and Kiri-Jolith and Meshakal on the side of good, and then Takesis and Morrigan and Chemosh on the side of evil. And this is just the religious reality, and then go create characters and play. Where instead of starting out from that place of existential fact, here's the gods, here's what they're the gods of, we move more to a description of what's the experiential form of religious tradition that these characters are playing with, and saying, well, we're not going to top-down categorize all of the followers of this god by that god that they serve. Paladine. All the followers of Paladine aren't the same. Kiri-Jolith. All the followers of Kiri-Jolith aren't the same. Like you and what god does your character worship in the game?
Oh, mine's the I'm spacing on the name right now, but the God of War and Vengeance.
Okay. Nice.
So that's the dark. Like, I didn't go with the god that was like probably more of a knight in shining armor, white knight god, that I'm just doing good for the sake of good. I chose to be more neutral.
Yeah.
And take the god of vengeance.
Yeah, you had somebody that was wronged.
Oh, I was wronged. My grandmother died, and it was me. And in my rage, I took the oath of this god of vengeance, which kind of taints all of my work toward the ultimate good. Because I'm neutral, I'm working toward the ultimate good. I just don't care how I get there.
Yeah.
Always. You know? So I enjoy that kind of freedom to be like, yeah, I'm working for an ultimate good per se, but I'll do some sketchy things to get there. Because I just find the other thing is just boring. Life isn't as black and white, I think.
Yeah.
I think a lot of decisions are made in the gray, and a lot of life is lived in the gray. But we tend to like have this like black and white outlook. I do feel like that's in the game too. These are the gods. This is what they believe in. These are the evil people. This is the good people. Go. And it's like world and life is more lived in the gray, and why people make the decisions that they do, and it's more complicated.
It's a lot more complicated. It's a lot more nuanced than this is the god, this is what they believe. There you go.
Yeah. And so I like to have set up the character to really live into the gray of like, this is what happened in life that made them make this decision, because to me in real life, that's human complexity. Like as a aspiring therapist, it is all based on family of origin, trauma, and where you've come from in life. And you have made decisions based on those things. You've made decisions based on your maybe path toward healing or not. And so like life does to a certain extent shape you.
Absolutely.
And so like I wanted to kind of, I like to play as an escape of real life, but I also want it to like be relatable.
Sure.
Otherwise it's like, because those are the best stories, right? The characters and the worlds that are like relatable to a certain extent.
Well, it's the best stories are the ones that really tell something about ourselves.
Right. And it can be in fantasy, but it's telling it's telling like a moral truth or a life truth, and it can be set in this fantastical world, but there's the meat of there's some truth in it that resonates in the human soul. And when we play these games and we engage in storytelling like this, for me, that's needed. Even in like when I read fiction work, I'm always looking for that, like, are you really basing this off of some type of human experience or truth, even though it's in a fantastical world.
Well, right. I mean, the story of Sam and Frodo is so compelling.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're hobbits in a fantasy world dealing with a fantasy problem. There's a magic ring that is exuding this force over everybody. But the human part of that is the real truth of that story that makes that story connect so far, which is that Sam has a deep and abiding love and friendship with Frodo, and that friendship carries him through dangers that he would have never faced without it. And that truth of friendship then becomes part of what makes that story so compelling and true.
Yeah. And and what makes it so compelling or true is, like, regardless if you have a friendship like that, we all desire and need connection in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And we all desire a type of connection with another human.
Yeah.
And we do know, we have that basic truth that we know when you have a kind of relationship like that tells a human truth, that you can do things that you would never imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can go further together than, they're just that we're built for connection. We're built. So that truth very much resonated, and it is still resonating. How many years later?
Yeah.
I mean, I just went to Con like last year, and Elijah Wood and Sean Austin was there, and years later, I mean, they're still
going strong.
Still going strong, that community, because it still connects.
Yeah.
And I think the same is in gameplay. When it tells the human, like, truth or that emotion or story that has that ring of truth, but also in that fantasy world,
mm-hmm.
I think there's something that hits.
Yeah. Yeah,
there.
there's that chance to tell a human story in this real fantastic adventure.
It, like, marries human truth with, like, dreams.
Mm-hmm.
The imagination
mm-hmm.
that I think we were all told to leave behind as children. And I feel like, D&D, we get to imagine and create worlds
mm-hmm.
that we did every day as kids, right?
Yeah.
And so
exactly.
we get to, like, flex that.
So how do we imagine worlds where we don't get to that place of dehumanization or easy stereotyping? I've already talked about starting from the bottom up. And what I mean is, like, when we go to design a world or engage with the world that we play in, even a designed one, that we start when we're going to play a character that has a religious background, maybe a cleric or a paladin or another character, that we look at the faith that they practice from that point of practice and really look at it less as, here's the deity I worship and that's all I need to know, and more as, like, this is a faction that I'm a part of. This is an organization. And look at what is the lived expression of that tradition. And that, that might look different from one character to another. I've got two characters in each of my Dragonlance games that both worship the god of just war, Kiri Jolith. But they both come at it from a very different place. One comes at it from a more, like, rancher agrarian place. They worship this god because it's a bison-headed god, and they were a bison rancher. And so they look at it and kind of come to it from this experience of ranching. Then there's another player that plays in the other game that I run, and they come at it from, well, this is a god of the knights, and this is a god of justice and right, and comes at it from a very more orderly, sort of polished perspective. And they both worship the same god, but there's difference in there. There's texture to it, because the faction of worshipers that they're a part of is different.
Mm.
Just like how we've got, if we look at Judaism, there's not one conglomerate thing that's, Jews. But there's lots of Judaisms.
Yes.
Just like there's in Christianity. There's Christianity, but it's not a monolithic thing. There's Christianities. There's the Lutheran Church that I'm a part of, and then there's Catholics, and then there's very, like, conservative evangelical Protestants that I have a lot less in common with than I have with you.
Yeah. And I think colonization, the kind of the colonization lens, is at play, even when we don't realize it. So I just want to say that, because I do think that colonization lens actually promotes what we're trying to get away from, right? That you are different than me, Therefore, I'm going to generalize you, and then I can justify what I'm going to do to you. Colonization, that's how it works.
Yeah.
You're different than me. You convert or die.
Yeah,
right?
You're different than me. I'm the ideal. I understand what you are. You're different. And because you don't match up to my ideal,
right,
I can do whatever I want with you.
So what does it mean to decolonize the game? And come from a different perspective? Like, coming from a Jewish perspective, I can speak for me, but there is a certain amount of like Reform Judaism and other veins of Judaism that difference of interpretation and opinion, and when it comes to scripture and culture is valued. The Torah isn't the only holy book that we have. And so there's other holy texts that we have that are basically interpretations of different rabbis' interpretations of scripture throughout history. And they're all held together, and you are welcome to bring your own. And that's what Midrash is. Like, can we bring questions, different perspectives to the text? So there is a part of Judaism that is values perspectives, and different perspectives even within Judaisms, right? And yes, are there more conservative Orthodox Jewish folks? Yes. I mean, every religion has that kind of gamut, but there is this, like, we have the same festivals that we all celebrate. There might be different flavors to different things, but there is this beauty in Judaism where we're all celebrating this as a people all over the world in many different flavors. Pesach, which is Passover, is celebrated by every Jewish person in the world. But the Haggadah, which is our basic guide through a Seder dinner, there's like so many different types of Haggadahs, and how the Seder dinner can be set and talked about and midrashed about and expressed, and that is okay. So there's a certain part of, like, in my faith tradition, that there's been a freedom. That's what made it so attractive to me, that there's this freedom of perspective, and that we learn from each other's perspectives. You would see something that I wouldn't see in a million years, and that's for a lot of reasons. But that's the way it's supposed to be. Yeah. That it's a conversation, scripture and faith and spirituality. This is all like a conversation. Yeah. And when it's treated like that, and it's part of the ethos of that religion, I think it kind of sets the page for it's what I appreciate about my own tradition, is that there is freedom of that to a certain extent. Do we have our own problems that are very similar to other religions? Yes, absolutely. This is not meant to be a generalization, blanketed statement, but there is this quality of perspective that is what I appreciate so deeply. And so I think when we have these conversations, because I've in a different tradition and very, very much been living there for a long time now, there's just more freedom and space for people to be. Yeah. And to learn from other people. And what does it mean to be, I think one of our main things is, what does it mean? Like, when we teach our children, it's more like we have a duty in the world to make it more whole. What does wholeness look like? That's what one of our main themes is. And how do we act as a people to contribute to the wholeness of the world and other people?
And in a, ironic way, one of the ways that I think we're proposing to arrive at a game that's more holistic is to have more space in the way that the supernatural conflicts and realities are presented in the game. Where even if you're playing in a world where the gods are already all defined, that when you come to the character part of it, that as a character you're filling in some of that space, and as the dungeon master, you're providing your character's space to create, well, what does this look like for you? What does the practice of this faith tradition actually look like for you? And then, flesh out some of those things. And maybe as a dungeon master, you present a campaign where you start out and you present some different factions or traditions that characters might participate in. What is the motivations of this particular group of followers? What's the themes or the colors of how they do things? Are they really focused on nature and naturalistic things? Are they focused on law and written scriptures? Are they focused on mysticism and kind of ineffable experiences of their tradition? All of these are, different colors or flavors that you can bring to the way that a religious tradition is practiced and presented and experienced. And then, what are the key practices that you might engage in? Is it shared festivals across the whole of all the followers in this, big tent? Is there something unique that's just unique to your little sliver? Answer some of those questions. And it doesn't have to be a long essay or 20-page religious backstory. It can just be a few simple things. And that adds enough texture and enough personality to the faith as it's practiced out to move it away from just this generalizing thing.
One of the things that I thought would be really interesting in building a world in this manner, because I don't think that we always have our how we act and what we do, and when we generalize, we don't always see the immediate effects of that. And so what would it mean to because we always say this, no matter in what tradition you are in, and I think this is where Christianity and Judaism are very similar, is that the image of God in people, right? Christians call it Imago Dei, and there's a different word for it in Judaism. And so this idea that every person, animal, creatures is created in the image of God, and and Christians say image bearers.
Yeah,
we believe that very thing. What would it be like to create a world where that is very physically true, and there are consequences for not treating people as if they are image bearers of God, regardless of difference? In Judaism, it's very everything around us is made by the Creator. So nature, that we are stewards of it, and that there's divineness in it all. And there's this saying we're all God here, and it's not to be flippant about it, but it's drawing this attention to there is God in us here. Us collectively are made in the image of God, live and breathe that. I am God's version of Trinning in the world, and you are God's version of Rorying in the world, and that is very purposeful and sacred.
Yes.
And so what would it mean to build a world where there is physical consequences for not treating others as part of the overall divine, regardless of what God you may serve, but it's part of the divine structure, right? So if I make a decision for whatever reason, my family's hungry or whatever, and I kill someone, that there's an earthquake or something immediately happens, that there is a very real understanding of the sacredness that you snuffed out.
Yeah.
What would that be? What kind of game, and how would you think differently? Because I know some people play, to just kill.
Yeah.
And I get that.
Yeah.
But that would be a different kind of game where you would have to think about what you are doing in the game and how you are doing things in a different way than I think a typical game.
Yeah, it would.
That would just be one thing that I would be interesting.
And that's where the conflicts come. And you don't, in playing in this way, then you can, you don't have to define all the followers of a certain God by whether that God is termed evil or good in the eyes of you or from your perspective. That it instead allows for, what's the real conflict here at the table? It's not that you're worshiping the wrong God. It's that you didn't respect the humanity of the person that you decided to assassinate because you wanted their power.
Oh, you mean we have to take responsibility for our actions?
Oh, man.
Instead of blaming somebody else or something
else.
else?
It makes people responsible for their actions. Instead of putting the blame for the evil, the blame for the grand scheme behind the thing, it's on some deity out there. It's putting the blame where it actually is, on messed up people.
Yeah.
Because we're all living in this gray area. We all have different motivations, and where the messed up person might be the high priest of the good church.
Yeah.
And they've really screwed up, and now you've got to, in play, address that problem.
Yeah, I think too it does speak to like a real life truth of I do think that we blame God for a lot of like human actions, and really we have a human problem.
We have a real human problem.
A human problem. And so like how much of our human problems do we attribute to religion or a deity, when really if we strip away that, like what is really motivating those decisions?
Mm-hmm.
And not that like religion doesn't play a role. I mean, yes, people have used God to do all sorts of things throughout, in all different, I would say, religions throughout time.
Oh yeah.
Right?
And people have used it.
Right. But people.
Yeah.
And so what would it look like to actually look at the people and the decisions rather than, well, God gave me this right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's very relatable to today, especially with conflicts in the world. And it brings up a tension, I think, in religion too, of like what life is being taken and why, and context matters. And just because once upon a time these people took these people, that doesn't make that right for all time.
Right.
And I would argue that there's some imperfections in Scripture, where Scripture gets divineness and people mixed up too.
Mm-hmm.
And people live in the tension of like, there's a very big tension-filled space of like, well, God told me to do this. God promised my people this. Like, I come from a religion base that, no, I don't believe that God's promise to me is my people is land, and that we should slay those that are sacred.
Yeah.
Like that, I don't think that's what it's actually teaching, because I mean the book of Joshua is not even historically true, and the battles in there are not even in right order. So like I don't think it was supposed to be taken literally, that it's teaching a truth, but not, I think sometimes we get that confused.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes that tension harder to live in, and people can use God for a lot of hurtful things. So
yeah,
I do think that it would be beneficial to play a game and think about our actions even in the game and how that affects other people.
Yeah, what are our actions in this? And to really, spend some time defining those, spend some of that game design time setting those up. What are the kinds of actions? What are the motivations of religious practice? And put those motivations on the people. How are the people doing this? And not on, not from the top down, because when you go from the top down, you end up in a way with a very easy stereotype and generalization. And it trains us to then do that in our real lives as well, and stereotype, well, all Muslim people are this way, all Jewish people are this way, and look at those big categories instead of looking at the incredible diversity of expression.
Absolutely.
at the human level.
Well, and just I think it makes more pathways for connection too.
Mm-hmm.
Generalization never leads anywhere good.
It doesn't.
So
take it out.
Take it out.
Take it out.
Take it out of real life. Take it out of gameplay.
There you go. Well, that's it for this pilot episode of the Roll for Joycast. Trin, where can people find you online?
Oh, yeah. So I do a lot of work with different people, spiritual guidance, teaching in context of Scripture. But when I say that, like Torah, Bible. And then, obviously, always going to slide a little therapy in there, too. So I actually own my own LCC called Seek, Heal, Grow. So you can find me at seekhealgrow.com. You can contact me there. You can send me emails and ask me questions. And I do storytelling stuff, too. So that's where you can find me.
Nice. And I'm at Roll for Joy, roll the number 4 joy, and you can find me on Threads, Instagram, all over. Also at rollforjoy.org, where we run our nonprofit project, Intersections of Ministry and Gaming, and have an upcoming retreat this October.
Yeah,
so,
and I'm going to be there because it's going to be fun.
It's going to be so fun. It's going to be so fun. So for now, remember, journey together, find the fun, and hold on to hope.
We'll see you next time, guys.
Thanks for listening.